I'm trying to change the industry because it needs changing. As construction professionals, we have a responsibility to guide our clients to make the right choices. If I'm a subcontractor or a main contractor, it's my responsibility to understand that my due diligence and part of my process is to allow and empower my clients to make the right decisions. People have stopped being honest and hence taking the con out of construction. Don't be the con in construction. Be constructive, be confident, be somebody that you can believe in. Don't be a con artist and don't try to screw people over. Act with decency. People will follow and things will happen. You'll always find the right clients and everyone will be a lot less nervous and we can just get on with our jobs, deliver our projects, get paid and live happily ever after.
Welcome to Taking the Con Out of Construction, the straight talking show that's changing the industry, one episode at a time. Small mistakes can cost big money and even more in time. But a small investment in listening to this episode could help you avoid disputes, delays, and costly pitfalls, while giving you the know-how to stop problems before they start. Let's turn complexity into clarity and take the con out of construction.
Welcome back to Taking the Con Out of Construction. For this episode, Michelle's talking all things variations. Michelle, variations is something you've touched upon in previous episodes, and this can be a real headache for contractors and clients alike, so I'm really looking forward to understanding this whole element so much better.
Yeah, so variations are inevitable. Don't get me wrong, on small projects and some bigger projects, there have been variations, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a cost associated. That's usually because there's either a contingency involved or the contractor's price things well enough that a few added bits they're not worried about doing, which is why I always say when you're entering into a contract with any contractor, main contractor, whatever it may be, you as a client, whether you're an end user, a main contractor, a subcontractor, whoever, don't screw them too far, because ultimately the more you screw a contractor, the less budget they've got in, the more likely you're going to get variations in the first place, and also the more hefty they're going to be. You have to be careful with variations at contract stage. So when you're agreeing a contract and a contract sum, you need to be aware of what's been priced in the first place, provisional sums, prime costs, etc. Now, there are contractors out there, main contractors, subcontractors, various contractors, that will price a job, they'll price it cheap so that they win it, and then they'll hit you with variations. Those type of contractors end up being much more expensive than the people that are just being honest in the first place and pricing the job well. So never go for the cheapest, but also have a look at people's provisional sums. Now, if I'm in reviewing a tender, for example, so I sent it out to tender, people have got their tender sums back. To do a real good analysis, you'll compare like for like for like. So say, for example, let's say electrical, let's simplify it. So I've got a project, it's a 5-bedroom house. It needs a rewire, it needs all new sockets, it needs a new kitchen, it needs new mains board. So you send it out to 3 contractors. Now, one of the contractors has picked up that the current mains into the building isn't going to be adequate for the new sauna that they're putting in or the extension because you're doubling the house and the supply isn't right. So they've allowed for a fee. Now, let's say that cost was like £1,500. That's contractor A. Contractor B hasn't priced for it at all, and contractor C has priced 250 quid for it. So contractor C knows it's required, but has put a provisional sum in for £250. Now they go to apply that provisional sum. Provisional sum means you don't know how much it's going to cost, but what you're supposed to do with provisional sum is you're supposed to put an accurate budget in. Now, sometimes that's impossible, but what you're supposed to do, so you use a provisional sum because you can't accurately price it, but you should put something in. Now, in the scenario I've just given you, contractor A is aware of it, not 100% sure because you're dependent on the third party, on the electrical board telling you what you can and can't do, where it's going to need to be and whether or not what groundworks you need or whatever. But say £1,500 would be realistic. Contractor B, whether they're aware of it or not, I've not included it. So there's definitely going to be a variation there. And contractor C knows it's there. They full well it's going to be more than 500 quid, but keeping it low to keep their contract sum low. So a decent QS or project manager, whoever that's looking at it, will know that there's a discrepancy. So when they're doing a tender review, what you tend to do is, this is the price that they've actually priced. These are all the bits and pieces that have been missed. And then what you do is, for contractor B that didn't put anything, you put £1,500 in because that's realistic. And then you add £1,000 to the other guy's price because you know for what that provisional sum is too low. And that makes you allowed to do like for like. So when you're looking at placing contracts with people, and depending on how they do, if they've got provisional sums left, right and centre, you know you need a contingency, but you also have to look at those provisional sums and see what they're likely to be. Now, if there's things that they've missed, and there's a number of things that they've missed that other contractors have picked up, you know for well that there's variations coming out in the front and centre. So that is a red flag for going forward with that contractor. Now, I'm not saying you don't have to go forward with them, because you can. You might like their work. You might like the way that they are. You might know that they've worked for somebody else. You know, like they're finished, whatever. You can still go with them, but you must make sure you've got a contingency, because there are going to be variations. You need to deal with variations and try to minimize them at the front end. Now, other things that you need to do which cause variations is make sure you've got your design accurate. Make sure it's what you want. So many times, and it really frustrates me, the client is push, start. Let's get going. The longer you spend on the front end, the less time and money you'll spend in the project delivery. So they'll rush. The architect's drawings aren't right. There's things in the architect's drawings that you know for well you don't want. You want to make changes, but you just want to get them on site. What people don't understand, and I don't get why they don't understand, because it's so simple to me, the soon as you get a team on site, you're incurring costs. So you're paying for welfare, you're paying for site management, you're paying for health and safety, depending on the size of the project, obviously. But as soon as you've got a toilet on site or any of the welfare facilities on site, you're paying money and the clock is ticking. If you can put that site back by 2 weeks just to get the design finalised, to get the contracts and agreed, to get as much of it you can up front, you'll save yourself thousands. And also, you're starting off right. So people aren't starting the job on the wrong design, because you know for well there's a change coming, because you've made that change yourself. The sooner you communicate that to people, the quicker it is. And also, you're not going to end up losing momentum, because what happens is when people are making changes and they're having to redo the work they've done, there's an argument because, well, I've done this and that. Oh, yeah, but we don't want that. And nobody wants to pay for something they don't want anymore. And all of a sudden, you've had something rewired because you've taken too long to make a decision. They've got to pull all that wiring out. That costs time. That's money. But then the person has made a change because they haven't made it quick enough or communicated it quick enough. That's a variation, but the variation is now increasing cost. To avoid variations, get your information right on the front end. The other thing is, people make changes. Now, especially in the domestic market, it's absolutely imperative that you manage this. Now, one of the things that I'm really good at is managing clients, especially in the high-end resi market. Now, what I do, and again, I don't think it's rocket science, to avoid variations or to avoid understanding or avoid complications, step outside the box and do something different. For example, if I'm doing a high-end resi project, whether it be a refurb or a new build, doesn't make any difference. I will walk around with the owner and I will have a conversation with the owner. Now, usually it is a woman, most of the time. It depends, not always. Sometimes it's a man, but a lot of the time it's a woman. Now, what you need to understand as a contractor is this is somebody's home. This image of this property might have been in this woman's head for 25 years. It might have been in her head for 5 minutes. She might not give a monkeys. However, there's a bigger picture. There's always a bigger picture. Especially with residential work, you're talking about somebody's home. They don't care what plasterboard you're using. They don't care what insulation's in there. They don't care about anything. What they care about is the aesthetics, what furniture's going where and where their sockets are, how it's going to look and how they're going to use the house and how practical it is. You can't expect a domestic client, could be a banker, could be a model, could be a vet, could be a showgirl, could be a horse jumper, could be anything. How often are they going to come across construction drawings? You're expecting someone to understand a drawing that a lot of us took a little time to get our head around. So what I would do is I would walk around the property, and yeah, it takes time and it's an additional thing, an additional service, but the benefit of it is unbelievable. So I walk around and go, right, here we are. This is your lounge. Your door opens this way, your light switch is here. Oh, no, the door can't open that way. There's a unit going there, or my sofa's going there, or my TV's going there, because all they look at is the end user. And they may have an interior designer that you haven't even met yet that hasn't even seen the drawings and has got their head in the game and got something different, but nobody's decided to communicate to anyone. These are the things you do at first fix, because changing the way a door opens and changing where the light switch is at first fix stage is either a minimal cost, 50 quid. Once you've got to plaster and decoration stage, that change in that switch is going to cost £1,000. Yes, you'd be entitled to that if it's documented properly, which I'll chat about in a moment, but ultimately it's avoidable. And I believe as contractors and construction professionals, we have a responsibility to guide our clients to make the right choices. I think we have a responsibility to understand who they are. They may or may not have representation. That's irrelevant. But if I'm a subcontractor or a main contractor, it's my responsibility to understand that my due diligence and part of my process is to allow and empower my client to make the right decisions. Because ultimately, yes, you should get paid for that, but why have a battle you don't need? Because when they're not aware of it, and then it's frustrating, and then it causes delays, and then it causes other issues, and then next minute they're having to pay more money, and then next minute they can't get that sofa they wanted because they've had to pay £1,000 on moving a light switch because they didn't understand. It creates a mentality, and then there's aggression and they don't want to do it, and then it all becomes a bit nasty, and then all of a sudden the other variations that they have done, they have asked for, they will get the benefit on, they've got a bitter taste in their mouth, and it just makes things awkward. If you go outside the box and just say, right, let's double check, yeah, we've got a drawing, you can stand up in court about a drawing. By the time you've got to court, you've run out of money. So if you just take some of these actions and look at it from their perspective, and even with commercial, you're looking at somebody's office, unless they're a builder, they're still not going to have that understanding of what they're doing and what they're looking at. So the issue is the same. And I do it the same with my commercial clients. I will walk around and just say, this is where this is going. This is where that's going. This is where this is going. Where do you want your light switches? I believe as a contractor's QS, so working on behalf of a contractor, if I see something that's wrong and I go, well, that isn't going to work with interior design, or I know this piece of furniture has been ordered, or this, that, and the other, do we not have a responsibility to use that on our expertise and going, sorry, mate, that isn't going to work, rather than what's on the drawing? Because yes, it might be on the drawing, but if there's an issue and there's a problem around it, and then they can't use that piece of equipment, you're creating animosity, which you might then not get paid for. So yeah, contractually and legally, you might be able to get that money if you go to court. But wouldn't it be better to avoid that? Wouldn't it be better to just go, by the way, that piece of equipment isn't going to go there. You've got this, this, and this, or that's not going to work, or that's not going to work. Do you want to relook at that decision in a site meeting 6 months before, rather than putting the variation in the data connections behind a massive 6-foot piece of furniture you can't connect to? Yes, you're going to get paid to rectify it. But really, is that how you want to get your extra work? That's not how things work, and that's just not how things should be. So I always try to get people to have a look at variations in that way. So have a look at the variation and be the consultant, be the specialist, be the professional, and say this or this isn't going to work. Now, don't get me wrong. There are clients out there that don't listen. They don't want to know. Some of them are arrogant. There are nightmare clients. For every nightmare builder, there's a nightmare client. I've met many of them. I've worked for many of them. I've had to quite a few of them too. But ultimately, I think we all have our responsibility to try and make the program work and the whole project and the delivery to work as best we can. There's always going to be exceptions. Now, pricing variations is different. Although, if you've got a bit of quantities, which are fairly outdated now, I think the only people that really use bills of quantities, in my experience that is, are ground workers. They're quite common with ground workers, but bill of quantities aren't necessarily used a lot. Now, a bill of quantities basically is a measure of everything that's on a drawing. So it will take the centre lines of foundations and it will measure, right, we've got 20 U-bends, we've got 35 straights, we've got 25 square metres of asphalt, we've got 35 square metres of reinforcement, we've got 100,000 cubic metres of concrete, whatever it may be. And it's literally is like a shopping list of every single thing you're doing. If you've got a bit of quants and there's a variation, it's very simple. A lot of people, especially subcontractors, don't understand that even if you've got lump sums, you don't have a schedule of rates, but you do. An example I always use is a decorator that I was working on. They were working on a project and it was decoration of a building and there was 5 floors and each floor had a different colour. So what happened was the decorating contractor completed those works. The interior designer came around, didn't like it, wasn't the right colour, wanted a different shade. They had installed the colours as per what their contract was, which is the information that the QS or whoever it was had issued. So in their contract, they had these particular rail colours. The interior designer said the wrong colours had gone into the contract, wasn't updated, whatever, or they didn't like it. I can't remember exactly the reason, but these colours had to be changed. Now, these colours were deep, dark colours. So the process to change them was quite considerable. So they basically had to do a white coat, a slightly thicker base coat to try and get it back to white, and then 2 coats again. Now, they tried to do that on day works. This particular client didn't like day works. But not only that, when I had a look in, I was like, this isn't the way that you should be pricing this. You're losing money here. Why? I said, 1, this particular contractor does not like day works. And I don't agree you should have day works on this because actually I think you're losing money. We need to go on a schedule of rates. Well, I don't have a schedule of rates. Yes, you do. So there you are. You've got the prices for each of these walls to be decorated different colour because they were feature walls. So they had a decoration for each floor. There might have been every floor, I can't remember, of the different colours they had. So each one of these colours was just one area with that one colour. So they were priced separately per floor. I was like, you've got a schedule. The only difference here is instead of doing a mist coat, you've done a standard coat. So it's still 3 coats. So you've got the white coat and then you've got the 2 coats of the next colour to get the right colour. The only thing you haven't got is prep. Now, these are fully new walls, fully plastered. So the prep would have been minimal anyway. But actually, you're going to have to use a bit more material because you're not doing a mist coat. Whereas with a mist coat, which is the first coat you do on plaster, you dilute it with water. So actually, we're going to say that this price is the same because ultimately you're using more material because you're not doing a mist coat. So that's 50% more material. They still had to do a little bit of prep work because at this point, people had bashed it and whatever else. I said, you need to put that in because it's the same work under the same rate. So when we worked it out, that one variation, his application went up by £9,000 from doing it my way instead of doing it day works. He would have done himself out of £9,000 that he was entitled to. So what I did was I did the application for payment. I sent the pictures of the original colour. I copied in the email of it being changed. I then did the order of the other paint and showed the difference, substantiated that we had to do a white coat. Here's the paint for the white coat. These are the 2 other coats. Send that in. This is the price. This is the contract rate. Did an extract of the bill or the contract sum that they did that was part of the contract that they sent. Here we go. Here we go. Bum, 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 bum. They couldn't do anything else but pay it. It was certified and it was paid. The other thing with variations, which I didn't do on this occasion because I didn't feel we needed to, because ultimately he'd already got his additional money than he would have done on day works. When you're pricing variations, you're also entitled to overheads and potentially an extension of time. Extension of time is something we'll discuss later, but just as a basic so you understand for anybody that doesn't, when you've got a contract, you've got a completion date. If you don't hit their completion date, most JCTs will mean that you will get deducted LADs with some liquidated ascertained damages, which means it's like a penalty, but it doesn't act as a penalty. It's actually the client's loss. So, for example, if it's a hotel and you're delayed, then it's the cost of them not being able to rent those rooms out. And that could be thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. I've even had contacts where the LADs are £1 million. Now, if there's things that have happened that aren't your fault, then you're allowed an extension of time, which means that date that you're supposed to finish back gets extended, which protects you from LADs. Now, not all extension of times also mean that you're allowed loss and expense. Again, that's a whole different conversation, but you can get an extension of time, and variations are the biggest reason for extension of time. So when you have a variation, for example, repainting all of these walls, that's taken him another 2 weeks from what he was supposed to do. So not only when you're issuing a variation, you should always advise them, even if you haven't issued an official extension of time, as part of your variation, you should note on there that this is extended the time for 2 weeks and you'll be issuing an extension of time request. You're also entitled to additional fees. Now, going back to the decorators example, because his costs that he'd done on the rates then had already covered his labour, his management, his equipment, because these were quite high ceilings, so therefore they needed scaffolding for them to reach the highest part of the ceilings. They had like mezzanine floors and stuff, so they were double stories, these particular walls that needed changing. Because that had all been allowed for, because he used the whole entire rate, it wasn't fair and reasonable, and there wasn't any additional cost for his time necessarily. He was covered because his day works and his materials had been covered over and above in that work. But if you're doing day works, depending on the circumstances, so you should get advice on it or have a check your contract, you are also entitled to overheads. So if you've got additional management fees, you've got additional printing fees, you've got whatever fees it may be, it's not just necessary to complete that work. It's the fact that you've got management, you've got overheads, you've got an extension of time. So you're working on the project, so your overheads are going to be higher. You're allowed to add overheads and profit to those variations. But also, if there's an addition, but there's also an omission, you have to make sure that you allow for the omissions in your addition. So it can't just be add. People often conveniently forget to admit the works they're not doing. So back to the decorators example, if they decided that they'd already decorated 3 of the floors and there was another 2 floors that were needed to be done, the variation would just to be for the first 3 floors because the other 2 floors hadn't been touched. So therefore they could change the colour at this point. And unless the colour was more expensive, unless it's a particular type of paint, it's highly unlikely to be more expensive. But if they decided actually the 5th floor was going to remain white, you have to admit the cost of painting that 5th floor a bright colour. So you have to make sure that your emissions are there, because you're just going to annoy people if you don't take out the jobs that you're not doing. The other thing with variations, and it all depends on the contract, if all of a sudden they choose to vary and remove a large chunk of your works and the contract allows them to do so, always check negotiating contracts, so they can't just do that without your profit. So there is potentials with variations that are an omission. Depending on the situation for the mission, the circumstances and your contract, you may be entitled to the profit associated that you would have had for that contract. But that's quite strict. You have to get advice on that or have a look in your contract. But sometimes these are the things that people miss. The other thing with variations, and if you haven't listened to my podcast on applications for payment, I recommend you do, is applying for a variation. So as I've said many times before, if you are owed the money, it's your responsibility to substantiate it, and variations is where it's even more important. You also need to check your contract. And I use a very silly example. If you've signed a contract or not signed a contract, and the contract's been issued to you, but you started on site, then you've agreed to the contract. We established this in the podcast about contracts. But if you've got a contract, signed or not, that you're in, and that contract states you are not entitled to payment of a variation unless Fred is standing on his head, as ridiculous as that sounds, if Fred isn't standing on his head, you're not entitled to payment. It's ridiculous. But the point is, if you're not entitled to a variation unless a subcontractor has got authorization from the project manager, the QS, the owner of the business, and Joe Bloggs down the road and the security guard, if that's what's in the contract and you haven't got those signatures, you're not entitled to that variation, even though you've carried out the works. Now, you may get away with that in other reasons because it's a variation and that's unreasonable and whatever, but it makes it a really tough thing to follow. So one, make sure that when you're looking at your contracts, you have a look at the variation clauses and what entitles you and what you need to do. And 2, you need to follow those rules. I know it happens on site all the time, but ultimately you've got to back things up and administer your contract. And if you can't, you need to employ someone that can. You need to get someone that put in systems and processes to make it simplified. You need to get somebody to work with you, set up the documents, whatever it may be, get a piece of software, whatever it is. If you aren't great at these backups and these pieces of information, and it's a big contract, you need to do what you need to do on a contract that you've signed to make sure that you follow things by clockwork. Because if not, yes, it's not the be all and end all, but it makes your life a lot easier. So make sure you're following the process of whatever it may be that's in the contract for your variations in the first place. Once you've made that application, also be wary of how those variations are dealt with, if they're diminished or if they're not backing up in writing, or the PM is refusing to sign them, or they're not abiding to their own contract, then you need to raise this. Personally, I would recommend speaking to a professional to raise this for you. However, you can do it otherwise, but you need to do it in writing. If you've got an issue that they are instructing things and they're refusing to instruct them in the manner in accordance with the contract, you need to raise that. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a problem at the final account and you will have nothing to back on. They will get a solicitor involved and they will absolutely tear you to shreds. Make sure you're raising these things way before you spend all that money. Because as I've said before in the application for payment podcast, they will do parent account, and try and skew at the end. And unless you know that actually that's illegal, and unless you've got someone that's going to fight your cause or you've got a solicitor in your pocket, then you're just going to get screwed. So what you need to do with variations is just be clued up and make them put their money where their mouth is and prove that they're going to do what they need to do. Because then when you get to final account and all of a sudden there's a problem, you've lost all the cards, you've lost the power. While the project is still running, you have power. So get your variations agreed as quickly as you can and do not allow consistent payment on account. Get them agreed. And if it comes to it and you sit there and have a meeting in front of that QS, do not let them go until you've agreed them. But obviously, you can't agree them unless you've given them all the information they need. Basically, put them in a corner. Give them the information, do what you're supposed to do, follow the contract, show the proof, have the photographic evidence, have whatever evidence you need to substantiate yourself to the point that it can't be argued, and then get them to approve it. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. And any decent QS would do it on site. As a contractor's QS and as a main contractor's QS, I try to get my final accounts agreed way before final account. Because when you're agreeing 7 or 8 final accounts, it's stressful and it's painful. And also people start lagging behind if they're worried they're going to get screwed. They don't want to put everything at it because they think they're going to lose money. And it's like, how much money am I going to lose? I don't want to lose any more money. I'm not going to make profit and all the rest of it. Whereas they've got confidence that actually they're not going to get screwed at the end. They will bend over backwards to make sure your project is delivered on time. If they think they're going to get screwed, they think screw you. So there's a mental side to it as well. So variations, clients, make sure you've got your shit together in the first place. Don't be sending an interior design package out in May, expecting the project to be finished in June. It's not going to happen. Make sure that you've covered everything so you're not having massive gaps and exposing yourself to contractors to adding additional costs. Make sure that you have a team and you are aware that what package covers what. So, for example, if you've got a plastering package, a dry lining package, and a decoration package, who's doing what? Who's responsible to the finish? What candidates they've got? Make sure that there aren't too many variations, because variations are things that have been missed. If you don't have the budget or a massive contingency plan, don't make changes as a client, because whenever you make changes, there's going to be additional costs. And make sure that you're substantiating yourself, you're following the rules, and you're actually pricing things properly. So there's probably a lot more that I could go into in variations, but because they can be slightly specific to the contract, I don't want to go on too much about specifics and how to do things, because ultimately I could be wrong. So you have to check your contract, and every single contract amendment that I've looked at in the past 6 months have all tried to change the variations process. I always object to that, and I explain why, because it's detrimental to both parties if you change the process. There's a process for a reason. The JCT variations clauses are very, very good, and there isn't a reason really to change them, but solicitors like to reduce their clients' risk, but actually they end up exposing them to more risk. But again, that's a whole nother podcast. Just double check what's happening, make sure you follow the rules, and be honest. And I think one of the problems in the industry is people have stopped being honest, and hence taking the con out of construction. Don't be the con in construction. Be constructive, be confident, be somebody that you can believe in. Don't be a con artist, and don't try to screw people over. We've all been in the industry long enough. We can see it coming a mile off. So if we just do the things that we're supposed to do, because ultimately it doesn't work in the long run, it just causes you more hassle. I'm basically trying to change the industry because it needs changing. And ultimately, we all have a part to play, and we all have a responsibility. And if we all just change the way that we act and actually act with decency, people will follow and things will happen. You'll always find the right clients, and everyone will be a lot less nervous. And we can just get on with our jobs, deliver our projects, get paid, and live happily ever after.
Thank you, Michelle. It seems like with variations, there's a lot of moving parts, but the way that you explain it so clearly, if they follow that process, things should go the way they're supposed to go. And that can make all the difference. Clear documentation, open communication, and key, understanding your contract. That's definitely something to keep in mind.
And if it's something you're not confident in doing, you don't really understand, get a professional to help you, because ultimately, even if you just get someone to look at one of your contracts, the most risky contract or the biggest contract you've got, if you get someone, employ someone to have a look at your variations and get them done properly. As I said, one application, I made my client £9,000 and the contract sum was only £50,000. That's quite a sum on top, and that paid for itself tenfold. So don't be scared to get some advice, to get someone to do it for you properly, because they will make you more money. And the same as if you are the client, if you think there's somebody that is overvaluing and causing problems, pay somebody to have a look at it for you and give that advice. You will learn something that you can use on every single project moving forward if that's what you choose to do. But it will also highly likely to save you much more money than it costs.
Thank you, Michelle, for such a comprehensive view of variations and showing how contractors can approach them with confidence and professionalism. Make sure you join us for the next episode where we're going to explore final account. Thank you very much, Michelle.
You're welcome.
If you found value in today's episode, hit subscribe so you never miss a new release, and share it with someone in the industry who needs to hear it. To learn more, access resources, or find out how Michelle Carr and Construction Alchemy can help you protect your projects, solve problems, and boost your profits, visit constructionalchemy.co.uk. Together, we can change the industry, one project, one company, and one episode at a time. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are based on the personal experiences of Michelle Carr and her guests. They offer general information only and should not be relied upon as professional or legal advice. Always seek your own independent advice before making decisions. Neither Michelle Carr nor Construction Alchemy accepts liability for any loss, damage, or consequences arising from actions taken based on this podcast. Thank you for listening.